I'm Kristin Wolfe Jensen, professor of Bassoon at the Butler School.
Well, welcome. It's great to have you here, and great to be talking about your newish book, about a couple years old, but making a lot of waves, and it's just really, really interesting book. So I read some of it, and it was just so fascinating. And one thing, it's called the Breathing Book, right? But it's really a lot about body mapping.
Yes.
Right? Something that I knew nothing about. So why don't you just briefly tell us, what is body mapping and how did you first discover it and how did you decide to write a book about it?
Yeah, I first discovered it when I was at the Las Vegas Music Festival on the faculty, and my colleague there, Stephen Kaplan, was teaching a class during the festival on body mapping. And I'd never heard of it as a thing before, so this was maybe 20 years ago. And I learned so much in that 5-hour course, actually 6-hour course, about how musicians can use their bodies more efficiently to avoid injury, avoid pain. 70 to 80% of musicians end up with some sort of playing-created injury, and that's just ridiculous. So most of them are avoidable if we are mapping our bodies correctly and therefore moving according to how our bodies are designed. So body mapping itself for musicians was dreamed up by musicians and Alexander technique teachers several decades ago. The Alexander technique works on body use and postural concepts as more of a hands-on. The teacher is helping you lengthen your neck and feel where you might be holding tension. Body mapping is not so hands-on. It's more a matter of looking at images of the skeleton and seeing how we are built and doing movement explorations to see how we move most efficiently and what our habits might be, where we're holding tension, and finding ways to let that tension go.
Oh, wow. And the body map, it's like it's like your concept of your body. Is that
Yes,
is that
we
right?
literally have maps in our brain that govern how we move. And those maps can be faulty, and in many cases are, because we've been growing and it feels different to have a 7-year-old body than it does a 50-year-old body. But also because of how we might see the body is actually not how it works internally. For instance, a lot of people think of the shoulder as this lump at the top of our arm and don't consider how it's really a joint where the upper arm bone, the humerus, meets the scapula or the shoulder blade, and how that joint needs to move in a kind of ball and socket way. So realizing that for a musician who's using a bow arm or holding a bassoon can help us move more efficiently and prevent possible injury.
In the introduction, you said, we are born breathing efficiently and according to our physical design. Unfortunately, as we grow, most of us develop habits of unnecessary tension and adopt misconceptions of how we are built, or as you would say, mismapped, right?
Yes.
That interfere with the natural processes of breathing in our everyday lives and in our bassoon playing. So how does that happen? How do we start okay? And then what are these misconceptions? Where does it come from? Where does the tension come from?
Yeah. If you watch a baby, an infant, breathing, their whole torso is moving in all directions, right? So that's what we want to emulate as grown-ups, as teenagers. And I think the misconceptions, the mismappings start to happen pretty early on. Toddlers usually move really beautifully and breathe really beautifully. And then if we start to put them in clothing that's too tight or make them sit in chairs that are too big for them or too small for them, and this continues into adolescence and adulthood, where most of our chairs in the band room probably fit people who are about 5'7".
Yeah.
And those of us who are shorter are really uncomfortable in them, and anybody taller is really uncomfortable in them. So that's something we all need to learn to negotiate. And when we sit down, how do we figure out this chair so we're actually using our body efficiently and not, in my case, being a shorty, kind of swinging my feet off the ground and
yeah.
slumping into the chair, or a tall person
Yeah.
adapting in some other dysfunctional way.
Wow, that was not the answer I was expecting. I thought you were going to say, well, it starts in 5th grade when they start playing the bassoon, but it happens way earlier than that.
I think so, yeah.
Wow.
And non-musicians have mismappings for sure as well, in terms of how they might be driving their car like this, or sitting at a computer like this. All kinds of issues that we as humans in the 21st century are bring up upon ourselves, whether we are thinking about it or not.
Yeah, we have to kind of unlearn all the bad habits. Yeah. So talk us through that first that exercise, the one where you stand up and you put it on the music stand, and kind of like what is that trying to accomplish?
Yeah, well, if we're going to be aware of how we're using our body when we play the bassoon, that's hard enough if you're not aware of how you're using your body when you're not holding this lopsided instrument, right? And it's something we need to look at when we're seated as well. We, in body mapping, define 6 places of balance. So the first one being where the cranium or the skull meets the top of the spine, and balance is there on the top vertebrae. And that spot, we often map somewhere in here where we think our neck ends, but it's actually between our ears. It's way up there that the skull meets the spine. The top vertebrae is right in the middle of our head. So that's an important place to map that. And when we nod our head, that's where the movement is happening. And our second place of balance is the arm structure. And that's important to be mindful of the arms hanging at the sides and just balanced over the rest of the body and under the balanced head. So many of us in our daily lives come forward of balance and chronically are staying there, and our muscles and fascia start to pattern to that, and that starts to feel right. So it's really important to keep that awareness and not let yourself get into forward curling. Or band directors are often telling their students, sit up straight and keep your shoulders back and down. That's equally as bad because you're yanking your arms back of balance. So it should really feel easy. Good posture should feel easy and natural. But again, most of us have been mismapping and using our bodies very dysfunctionally for a long time, so it's hard to tell what's natural and normal.
Yeah. So there is a word you use a lot in this book, falsehoods. Mm-hmm. Right, when talking about kind of how maybe you learned and other people have learned, like you were just talking about with the band director. I'm not sure if you actually used that word just now, but kind of these things that have been ingrained in the pedagogy that maybe aren't correct. So you can talk about a little bit of some of those, and when did you kind of realize that some of these were false heads and maybe not the best way to teach or to play?
Yeah, I think on some level I realized it as a student when my teachers of all levels, whether it's a middle school band director or a university or conservatory bassoon teacher, would try to explain breathing. That's a hard thing to do. It's not like a bow arm, which everyone can see, right?
And even that's hard, the bow arm. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Breathing is so internal, and there's so many components to good breathing. Air comes in through our nose or mouth, goes into the lungs. Yes, the diaphragm is breathing or moving, and the entire torso needs to be moving. But I think in order for a quick instruction in a lesson or a band rehearsal, teachers come up with things like, breathe into your diaphragm. We don't breathe into the diaphragm literally. We breathe into our lungs. That's where the air goes. So that's an important distinction and mapping to know that your lungs are in the upper third of your chest. That's where the air is going. Yes, the diaphragm moves, but there are very few nerve endings in the diaphragm. So if I asked you right now to point to your diaphragm or to wiggle it, could you do that?
No.
Yeah, none of us can, right? So I think talking a lot about the diaphragm in our instruction is not very helpful unless we go through a whole book and look at the diaphragm's role in a full body breathing process.
Okay, so what would be a good like starting out for like that fifth grade students of how to what are the kind of the early steps with breathing? Is there some like tips or I mean I know obviously in the book there's a whole bunch, but what are some of the biggest falsehoods besides the diaphragm that you would suggest to teachers?
Yeah, I think knowing where the lungs are is really important, that they are within the rib structure, knowing where your ribs are. And the ribs, thankfully, are really mobile. So we have cartilage here in front that attaches to the sternum that's springy and can expand. We also have joints between the ribs and the spine. So our ribs can move up and out as we inhale. And that creates space in the lungs. And that difference in air pressure moves air into the lungs to fill up the empty space. So to me, the main attraction in breathing is the ribs moving up and out, creating space for air to go into the lungs. So I think for a fifth grader, letting them know that all of this part of their body, their torso, is allowed to move and should be moving when they breathe.
Okay, and the posture shouldn't be, it should just be kind of relaxed, like you're...
Yeah, balanced is what I like to call it.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's relaxed, it's easy. And not sitting up straight, because if you do that, you're incurring all kinds of tension to hold yourself up straight. But our bones are really built to keep us in balance and hold us up.
Yeah.
With a few postural muscles, but they don't really need to exert themselves. Should feel very easy to be in balance.
Yeah, so when they say just hold yourself up straight, like is that just because like they think it looks better? Like because sometimes bands can be a little militaristic.
Yes.
Like it's almost like boot camp a little bit.
I think that's part of it, for sure. And I think it's also a counter reaction to slumping and slouching, because that's not good either, obviously, because everything's compressed that needs to be able to move and fill up. And yeah.
Yeah. And this book, it's really interesting. You talk about like how our weight goes down, but also like what's beneath us supports us, like the floor and the chair. So talk a little bit about like, you know, what kind of chair? I know you said that you could be standing. Is it, do you suggest students practice at all standing?
Absolutely.
Or is it a chair, a certain kind of chair or?
Yeah, I think it's important to experiment. Standing, sitting, how high is your chair? Of course, we can't always control that when we walk into a rehearsal. They're usually all the same height.
Yeah, so the book's, you know, it's a breathing book, but you've got all these chapters on just totally different things like the jaw, right, the pelvic floor, and just kind of talk through some of that. Like what is that about? Is that still about breathing, or have we moved into something different?
Yes, it's all body mapping, and all of that comes back to how we breathe. So the jaw, particularly important for wind and brass players and singers, but it affects all of us. The jaw joint is way up here, and how we use that is going to affect how the breath comes in. If we open too wide, it actually closes the opening to the trachea, the back of the throat. So we want to open just enough to get the optimal air in. So even that relates to breathing. We talk about the facial muscles and the embouchure, which is going to affect how you breathe. You want to keep your embouchure pretty well intact as you're breathing.
So what is an embouchure?
Embouchure is the whole mouth structure.
Okay.
As you play a wind or brass instrument. It's a French word.
Okay.
Mouth of the river is its origin. So on bassoon, it looks something like this. And so it's important to talk about all of the facial muscles that go into forming that embouchure. And
yeah, so how do you keep no tension? I mean, that looks like so much tension.
Well, I've built some muscles up over the years for
okay.
sure. Yes, there are muscles involved that are activated. The tension, I think, is important to avoid. Brass players particularly will get blown out, so to speak, where the lips cannot function anymore.
Oh, no.
If they play too many hours a day or play too high or play without warming up, this can happen to woodwind players too. So we have to be careful how we use our muscles, like in any muscles or in any use in life. So I think that's important, certainly from a musician's body mapping standpoint. But again, it comes back to how you breathe. You have to open your mouth, change your embouchure a little bit to get air into the mouth. So we do talk about that in the breathing book.
Yeah.
We have a chapter lesson on arms.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So talk about that.
It seems like arms would be completely separate from
It
your
sure
breathing.
does, yeah.
But fact is, if your arms are squeezed in at your sides while you're holding a violin or while you're holding a bassoon, you're limiting your rib movements. And your lungs are inside your ribs and can't expand as well. And even if you're clenching your fingers on the instrument, not only are they not going to move as efficiently for finger technique, and you'll probably incur some tendonitis or osteoarthritis eventually, but that tension, if you clench your fingers right now and try to breathe, I bet you're going to breathe a little more tensely.
Yeah.
So did you experience that?
Maybe I'm overthinking it now. So I'm not sure if I actually am or if I'm overthinking it.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. So any unwanted tension, unnecessary tension in our body can affect how we're breathing. There's a whole chapter on legs and how those affect us.
So the legs aren't attached to the rib cage?
They're not attached to the rib cage, but the psoas muscle comes from the inner thigh up over the outside of the pelvis and attaches to the diaphragm and to the spine.
Wow, okay.
So that's psoas, P-S-O-A-S, is a real connector of lower body and upper body. So if your thighs are tight, you can actually be yanking on the psoas, which is yanking on your spine, also on your diaphragm and limiting the diaphragm's movement.
Oh, wow.
So we are one big and integrated breathing organism, and if one thing's out of whack, it can throw off everything else.
And do they have tension in their legs when they play? I wouldn't think so, but
Yeah, as an anxiety or stress response, absolutely. I'm doing it all the time and having to remind myself to let go of that tension.
Okay, so it's just like a clenching kind of? Or
Yeah.
Is it,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of this stuff, like when you first start and you're only playing, I don't know, 15 minutes a day, right? You're in 5th grade. It might not be that important, but if you're doing it for hours, right, it becomes more and more important.
That's right. Yeah. Really, we should be able to practice or play 6 to 8 hours a day if we are using our body efficiently and in balance and breathing well and taking breaks, of course. We don't want to hash it out for eight hours straight. But I think the injuries and the problems come in when we're out of balance. And, a joint is, whether it's the elbow in your bow arm or the shoulder joint is coming forward, and then you're wearing down on joints or inflaming tendons, that's when the injuries start to arrive.
Now, and I assume it doesn't just happen. Like, do you start to feel, is it discomfort? Is it pain? Like, what are some of the red flags when someone's playing to look for?
Yeah, certainly pain. The minute you feel pain, stop and figure out what's causing that. Look at your full body balance. Go to a physical therapist or doctor and ask another player, either of your instrument or some other instrument or a body mapper or an Alexander technique teacher, to look at how you're moving to make music, because it should not be painful.
Yeah, so how important is kind of warm-ups, warming up the body before just diving into playing?
I think that's really important, because as musicians, we are movers. You don't see an athlete just starting up the marathon fresh, right? There are stretches and dynamic warm-ups to get the blood flowing to muscles in the entire body. So yes, I think it's important to plan minimum 5 minutes into the beginning of your practice session to just do some walking, get breathing, do some arm circles backwards and forwards. And once the blood is flowing and you feel like your muscles are a little looser, then you can do some stretching of the arm muscles that you're using, but also full body. Remind yourself that you have that it does matter, your feet, and remind yourself of your full body balance. But absolutely some a little bit of aerobic exercise before playing will actually enhance that practice session and help you avoid injury.
So does aerobic mean like a walk around the block, or does it mean like jogging, or does it mean like what does it mean, aerobic?
Good question. It does mean getting the heart rate up a little bit.
Okay.
So whatever that means for each individual's current level of fitness. So if somebody's really fit, maybe they do need to run around the block. If somebody's not particularly fit, that's okay. But walk down the hall a couple times and get the blood flowing, get your breathing moving.
Yeah. Before I worked here at Butler, for anyone listening says, I don't have time for warm-ups. So before I worked at Butler, I worked with athletics. So, and I would go to all the basketball games, and I would be there hours before, and their warm-up starts like 4 or 5 hours before. And it's advanced. And these are like, some of the top athletes in the world. And that's the level they take they do more warm-up than they do playing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can do 5 minutes.
Yeah,
right.
Minimum.
As a musician,
minimum.
yeah.
And,
minimum, okay.
And that's before you even pick up your instrument, right? And then there are the instrumental warm-ups. But yeah, I feel best when I've done a half-hour bike ride or a half-hour of yoga or more before I play.
Yeah.
Ideally, that's...
So like, what do you do before a concert to warm up? Because that's kind of interesting. Like you're in your, like a nice dress, you're in, right? Like it's hard just to like go for a jog, but maybe people do.
Yeah, most concerts are later in the day. So the body is hopefully somewhat warmed up from walking or running or whatever kind of exercise or just movement you've chosen to do that day. But right before a concert, I think it's important to figure out a balance between rest and warm-up movement. So if I'm really hyped up and anxious about a concert, I'll want to blow off some steam by exercising or running or skipping. I've been seen skipping backstage.
Oh, wow, okay.
Or Andy Parker and I have, we call it the drunken jaguar, where we just kind of modern dance ourselves backstage.
Okay. If the audience only knew.
If they only knew what was going on
back there. Because they think you're just there studying the score.
Yes, all serious.
The drunken jaguar, yeah.
So, yeah, I think everybody has to find their own sweet spot of movement and rest before a concert, for sure, as well as a practice session. But it comes back to awareness again and really noticing when your body feels great, when it feels ready to live up to the huge demands we put on it as musicians, from fingers to breathing to the emotional outpouring that we try to achieve.
So, and let's talk about, what was like the light bulb moment when you decided you needed to write this book? Like when did it happen? Did you have an injury? Did you just see students with injuries? Was it just something you thought was neat? Or maybe there wasn't a light bulb. Maybe it's just been a slow progression.
It was a progression. I've always been interested in movement and health things. And just when I have a chance to read, I like reading about nutrition or exercise. And so when the pandemic hit, I had a little more time because the Butler School was pretty much all closed down for a year. And as I was just teaching online and not commuting, I had
and
more
there's no
time.
performances to prepare for?
No
right?
performances to prepare for. I had extra time, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this time that I'm excited about? And so I thought it would be something having to do with movement. Still on my bucket list is to become a personal trainer.
Oh, wow, okay.
So that'll be my next book, perhaps. But so it was during that year that I pursued body mapping to become licensed as a body mapping educator, and got my license within that year and began teaching it in my Healthy Musician class here at the Butler School, which meets once a week, and we cover all kinds of topics in addition to body mapping. But
I hope that class is required.
It's not yet.
It's not? Okay.
I think it should be.
That should be, yeah. With all the injuries and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to be preventing all those injuries. So I guess once I was licensed, I gave a webinar to the body mapping community about Bassoon and some of the ergonomics involved with this weird instrument, and a little bit about breathing. And within a week after I did that webinar, the publisher of this breathing book contacted me. His name is David Vining, and he runs Mountain Peak Publishing. And he said, I was at your webinar, and I've been looking for a bassoonist to write the bassoon breathing book, and I think you're the person. I was like, okay, that sounds fun. I'd love to do that. And that was just about 3 years ago. And so I got right on it and spent about a year formulating the book, and poof, wow. It was out.
Wonderful. And who is the target audience? Because when I was reading this, it's like it could almost be anybody. Is this something that you would suggest a fifth grade parent buy, or is this something teachers should buy, or is this something college students? Who is the target audience?
Yeah, it's really aimed at bassoonists of all levels, but also lay people of any ilk, right? It's how we carry ourselves daily and how we breathe is so fundamental to a healthy life that even you, if the bassoon-specific stuff doesn't apply, hopefully you're still learning something that's valuable in your daily life. So, I think part of what body mapping aims to do is make the topics accessible. So I'm not talking a lot about the scientific terms of joints and bones and all that stuff, but just.
But I did learn a lot about that kind of stuff in here. Different joints and I didn't know there was a bone there.
Right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. Yeah.
All this stuff we're carrying around in our body all day, and we don't know enough about it. So I try to make it very relatable and accessible to people of any age or interest level, but surprisingly essential for professional players and advanced students as well, because I learned a lot researching the book and researching body mapping itself in the past several years as aged as I am. It's been really valuable for me and my playing and my teaching to explore this at this point in my career.
What has changed most, do you think, the teaching or the playing?
Probably most measurable the teaching, because everything that's in that book I use every single lesson. But not insignificant is that my playing has progressed and gotten just easier, I think, after several decades of playing the bassoon, that certain things started to click and open up, which is important for all of us to keep revisiting if we're not aware of how we're using our bodies. The bassoon side slump just gets a little deeper every year, right?
It gets heavier and heavier every year.
Heavier and heavier. And before you know it, we start walking around like that.
So how do you think, like, if there's someone out there teaching bassoon right now, how do you think their teaching would change? Like, how would their lessons look differently after implementing what's in this book? Yeah,
I think it's a matter of, and I've heard from several teachers who have embraced the book, and I'm really grateful that they're using it and sharing the information, because I think it's going to help the music world overall, not just their specific students, breathe better, play better, because when we're breathing better, our sounds get more resonant, and therefore it's more fun to play, and we can shape a phrase more easily because our dynamic range expands, but we're also avoiding those injuries later in life. But I would hope that, part of what is necessary to really embrace everything in this breathing book is patience and not going for the instant gratification or the instant change in a student, because it takes time to map all the different body parts involved in breathing and to really experiment with different ways of conceiving of how you're breathing, moving both in and moving the air out. It's not something that you can teach with one quick phrase like breathe from the diaphragm, or make sure you don't lift your shoulders when you breathe, which lifting too high, that is a problem. But it can also be a problem to not let this area move at all, because our ribs and lungs are right under it. So contextualizing and taking the time in the teaching process to build these concepts into the long term And that should be starting from day one, lesson one, band rehearsal one. That is just part of how we make music, is to have this bodily awareness.
Yeah, are these exercises, are these things, and I'm kind of talking from a teacher's perspective, are these something that they would do in the lesson as opposed to assigning it, or would they do both?
Yeah, I think that depends a little bit on the student's level and commitment. For instance, I chose to assign this over the summer to my bassoon students, so that, and I said take a few days with each lesson. Each chapter is 3 or 4 pages. And then there are some examples at the end that allow you to practice the concepts. So for my incoming freshmen and incoming graduate students, I suggested they work through it throughout the summer, a few days on each chapter. And then I can start lessons assuming they've got a basic knowledge. We will, of course, review things as necessary. If they're really having trouble expanding up here, then maybe I'll assign chapter 4 for next week, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it just depends on learning style. And for a 5th grader who's maybe only practicing a half hour every 2 days, maybe it needs to be just concepts worked into each lesson when they are in person with their teacher, or that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Awesome. And I guess this was quite the family effort, right?
Yes.
So talk a little bit about, like, I know your daughter was involved, your husband, I think your sister was involved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. So my sister is a PhD in anatomy and
seriously
teaches at CU Boulder online. So yes,
How lucky is that? Your sister teaches anatomy?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I sent her a few chapters and said, am I talking truth here? And she was very helpful, and just sort of terminology in that.
That's one of those texts like, just call me, right? Did she text you back?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And my husband is a Danish translator, working online and translating English to Danish, Danish to English.
Okay.
But through that, does a lot of editing in both languages. And so everything I wrote, I'd send to him, and he had great suggestions just in semantics and helping things be understandable and presentable and grammatically correct, I hope. There's still a lot of debate on the Oxford comma and things like that. Because my friends were getting involved in that too, and couldn't please everybody on the commas, sorry.
Yeah.
But and then my daughter is now a cosmetologist, a hairstylist. So you'll see my hair has changed since the photos 2 years ago in the book, actually, thanks to Annika. But she took the photos that are in the book of demonstrating different embouchures and seated balance and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it was a family effort.
Awesome. And I think you mentioned you're thinking about coming out with another edition?
Yes. Actually, I just finished work on that a mere 2 years later. My publisher came to me and said he was interested in a second edition because with his trombone breathing book, he had added to each chapter QR codes where the reader can QR code it and have access to a video that either demonstrates the playing example at the end of the chapter or re-explains some of the physical concepts discussed in the chapter. So the second edition was a great opportunity for me to make some videos. They're on my hard drive now.
Does your daughter help with all the stylist stuff?
Well, just on a daily basis, yes.
Okay.
But I did the video recording myself.
Okay.
So yes, each chapter, I don't know when it'll come out, probably before December, I'm thinking.
Oh, wow.
But each chapter will now have QR codes to videos, which I think will really enhance the experience. So some of them I'm playing the examples, some of them I'm just talking through, or giving new angles to the material that's there. And in some cases, I just found an existing YouTube video that really demonstrates the concepts really well.
Do you do like, this is what not to do? or do you only show what to do?
Occasionally I'll do
Okay.
what not
Yeah,
to do, just because you'll see student bassoonists, with their reed way up here, and
Yeah.
clearly that's not in balance, or kind of coming down to the reed. So yes, I do some of that.
Okay. Is it available on Amazon, I assume, or?
Yeah, it's available at Amazon from the publisher, Mountain Peak Music.
Okay, great. We'll put the links in the description below. But thanks for stopping by. This is wonderful.
Thanks so much for having me.